a quick note before we kick off on housekeeping. Again, mobile phones, if you can make sure that they're on silent. And we're also still having trouble with the streaming. It is because too many people are using the Wi-Fi. So if you could just pull off the Wi-Fi during the presentation, that would be great. Okay, so this afternoon we kick off with the presentation for Populous, where they've looked at the socio-economic and political trends of stadia around Europe. I'm delighted to welcome Matt Grace, who's come all the way from London, and he is the Senior Associate Head of Marketing for Populous. So welcome, thank you for taking the time to be with us today, Matt. Thank you. So guys, we're very much looking forward to your presentation, and I hand you the floor. Thank you.
Good afternoon. We present the project Social, Political and Economic Trends of Stadia Development Across Europe, carried out in collaboration with Populous. Populous is considered one of the largest sport facility architectural firms in the world, with 600 collaborators in 17 offices and 1,325 stadia designed in 34 countries. Their recent examples of their recent projects in Europe are Tottenham Hotspur Stadium in London and Parc Olympique Lyonnais in Lyon. I present our team: Enrico, Paolina, Alberto, and Nicolai, myself. Our combined experience is mostly in economics, architecture, and event management. Our mandate was to assess the current trends associated with the stadia development in Europe and to produce a report that would serve as a benchmark for the marketing operations of the client. A few words about the methodology. We received a list of 865 stadiums from the client, and we decided to focus on European stadiums with the capacity of more than 50,000 seats. General information for all these 62 stadiums was collected in the stadium cards. Each stadium was analyzed in terms of national and international importance, availability of secondary research, and the activity level. Finally, we selected 32 stadiums as the final sample and agreed with the client on this. So this is the sample of 32 stadiums. Most of them are from the Western Europe, with the exception of Russia, Ukraine, and Turkey. Across Western Europe, the stadia are evenly distributed with an average of 2.5 stadiums per each country. The next step was to choose 30 indicators for the stadia comparisons, and which we grouped in 5 dimensions. The first dimension was the social dimension, which identifies the social impact of the stadia on the well-being of the social well-being of the community. The political indicators, they analyze how different actors are involved in the stadia development. Environmental indicators, they recognize the growing role of the environmental trends in the stadia construction and operation. The economical indicators, they show how the stadia contribute to the economic success of the city. And finally, the cultural indicators, they show how the stadias add to the touristic and cultural offerings in the stadia. Then all the information for these 32 stadia was collected in the master chart, and all our findings, development and the regional trends derived directly from this master chart analysis. Before jumping into the indicators analysis, it was useful to see the phases of the modern stadia development up until now. The first generation stadia were large constructions aiming to accommodate large crowds, very uncomfortable. Starting from the 50s, the second generation Stadia began their competition with the television. So Stadia became more comfortable with proper toilets, food corners, beer stalls, and it is at that time when the executive boxes appeared. Then the third generation Stadia is marked by, as here we can see, with all seated stadias covered by the roof. They increased more security and comfort to the stadia. And the fourth generation Stadia, the examples are the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium and Groupama Stadium in Lyon. These are highly engineered and mediatized stadia discovered by sponsors as the advertising vehicles. The stadia we analyzed belong to this fourth generation stadia, or they are transitioning from the third generation to the fourth generation. Enrico.
So now we are going to show you our findings and trends. As a general findings, we put in relation capacity and the age of the stadia. We decided to divide our stadia in 3 different groups according to their capacity. And we split them in 2 different categories: stadia with more than 20 years and stadia with less than 20 years. As you can see, the old trends was to build a bigger stadium. In fact, the stadia with a capacity higher than 80,000 seats represent the 50% of the total amount of the stadium. Nowadays, the trend is to build smaller stadia, and you can see that the 55% of the percentage is represented by the stadia with a capacity of 40 and 60,000 seats. The technological devices are really important in order to improve the fan experience. We define the easy access to the Wi-Fi connection and 3 and 4G for the mobile phones. And it's linked to the mobile application in order to give a new service to the fan. It's going to be possible to show to the fans the highlights during the game, to order food from the seat, and to receive special offers from commercial activities inside and nearby the stadium. From our study, we have only 10 stadia that already have this technology. So that's why we suggest them, and we said that they are like a new trend. Giant screen. From our study, we have 14 stadia with this kind of technology. They are becoming really important using the VAR technology in order to show the action to the fans and what happened on the field, on the pitch. The presence of the retractable roof is a technology really important for the fan in order to attend the events during with a bad weather condition, but at the same time is important for the multi-use of the stadium. We define it as the maximization of the usage of the stadium during the non-match days, and we consider the sport partnership as the new partnership, for example, the new partnership between NFL and the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium in London. The multi-sport events, from our study, we have 16 stadia with, that have already hosted these kind of events, and it should be really important to have a retractable pitch in order to host sport that needs a smaller size pitch. The non-sport events, obviously, such as concert, in order to make more revenues out of the regular season. Cultural trends are related to the presence of the museum that are becoming a tourist attraction. It's interesting to know that 2 years ago the FC Barcelona Museum had more visitors than the Pablo Picasso Museum, becoming the first museum visited in Catalonia. The tours are really important, and all of our stadia are organizing stadia tours with the possibility to visit the dressing room, the beach, and the bench. And the international prestige that is related to the historical tradition, hosting, for example, Olympic Games, World Cups, or Champions League finals, that gives a higher identity, a stronger identity to the local community. Alberto?
So there is an interesting difference between the economic trends of stadia that receive government funds versus those that do not receive government funds. Those stadia that do not receive government funds, what we notice is that they might not seem to consider the external costs that they impose whenever they organize an event to the local community. These external costs, and we've called them negative externalities, are the traffic congestion, noise, and the pollution that happens when they organize an event. In addition, stadiums that do not receive government funds, they seem to prioritize the private costs over the social costs, and this is partially due because of their profit maximization. Nonetheless, some of the actions that stadia are doing is basically they are encouraging the fans to use public transportation. In our study, we identified that 32 out of 32 they are basically, again, encouraging the use of public transportation. Croke Park, for example, they've implemented curfew hours. And lastly, 20 out of 32, they've implemented recycling programs. Another interesting thing that we saw is that 8 out of 32 stadiums, they saw an increase in the property values, but only within the local community. It is important to mention that there's not a lot of studies that can support and validate this. But I mean, on the 8 stadiums, we found that this is only a trend that happens within the local community and only happens in the short term. Also, 14 out of 32 stadia, they have a naming rights partnership. We believe, and studies show, that this is a trend that is expected to grow, as this is a big revenue stream that can help to further develop stadia. Also, 13 out of 32 stadia, they're located at suburban areas. And the idea with this is that land on the studies showed that land outside of the city center, it's cheaper and there's also more space to build. And also a very interesting trend that we identified is that nowadays parking in stadia is being reduced. And the idea behind this is that one, they're encouraging fans to use public transportation. And another one is that the parking available is offered to their VIP customers, and the parking spaces that were built before, now they're being occupied either by hotels, business districts, shopping centers, and yeah.
So on the social side, we discovered that public infrastructure improvements are very important. So 22 out of 32 of the stadia have improvements associated to them, and this it varies from public transportation options as a new subway station, but also improvements in sporting infrastructure. For example, Luzhniki Stadium, the improvements vary from new roads, new train stop, but also playgrounds outside the stadium, and allowing the neighbors to come and use the track and run, just like the stadium is part of their community. Green areas, 17 out of 32 are really considering creating public space. And public space, again, is also presented in different variations, from esplanades as a meeting point, or greenery, green parks, new trees, landscaping work, and also some innovative examples like in Grupama Stadium that they have beehives around the stadium. Community facilities and activities. So most of the clubs that are the main tenants for the stadium have their own foundations, and through these foundations they promote social projects, for example, employment programs or entrepreneurship programs for the neighbors again and for the city, but also sporting events. In the case of San Mamés, there was a commitment from the organization creating the stadium to build a gymnasium and a swimming pool under the stadium, so it's a public swimming pool. On the environmental trends, so we know how relevant this is becoming. That's why 10 out of the 32 studied stadiums have some sort of certification. 6 of them were incorporated during the design and construction, and 4 of them were part of renovations. All of these cases are at least 20 years or younger. So it's definitely a new trend that's being incorporated strongly. The most adapted or used certification type is ISO, and it's interesting to note that this can also be implemented for a specific event, such as in the case of the London Olympics. So it can be, even if the stadium does not have any certification, it can be brought in later. And for those stadia that do not have a certification, they still have strong environmental strategies, such as waste classification and recycling programs. It's interesting to see Crow Park, how they have a composting program, and they invite all the neighbors to use that compost and just come and pick it up once a year, and that creates a social link. 12 out of 32 have harvesting water strategies, and this is water that it's being repurposed from rain to, I don't know, taking care of the landscape or watering the lawn. Also, there is drainage system from the pitch, and that water is again also repurposed for toilets or cleaning. 5 out of 32 claim to be energy efficient by using LED lighting or implementing other sources of energy, such as windmills or photovoltaic panels. And it's very interesting to see how these buildings, just as any other type of buildings, they're becoming really smart. And how do they do it? They have basically what is sort of like a control room where they can see everything that's happening. So everything is controlled via sensors. They can see how much energy is being used, how much water is being used, and actually respond to that. So when studying all this stadia, we started noticing that there were some very specific and particular cases. So we decided to go in depth on 5 countries. This is what we call regional trends. In the case of Italy, we went through 5 stadia, and it really stands out how they're mostly publicly owned, and there is a huge opportunity for naming rights. In the case of Spain, we studied 9 of them. And again, these are public-private owned. In the case of England, there is a big opportunity for naming rights. Germany, 4 stadia. It's very interesting to see how almost all of the matches are 90% or more attendance. And this is very unique for Germany. For France, there is a transition from ownership transition from public to private. Conclusions and recommendations. So on the conclusion side, stadia acts as a source of pride and international prestige, especially when hosting or being part of a large mega sporting event. The maximization of stadium usage during non-match days is very important, so increase the offering of different events. Additional revenues coming from naming rights and everything that my teammates mentioned has also become really relevant. And stadia brings improvements to public transportation through, again, new roads, new stations. And finally, stadia developments triggers local development. recommendations for further studies. So our study was pretty big and broad. We had a lot of cases, but we feel that there could be further analysis on each dimension separately. For example, a complete economical research or political. We couldn't do that, and that would be interesting to do. At the same time, another in-depth study on only maybe regional trends, so you can assess specific market opportunities. Our research was mostly desk research, so going to the stadium, interview people involved, it will be like a next step on the study. And finally, analyze lower capacity stadium, because there might be different trends that we were not, we didn't cover it because they behave probably in a different way. And before we end the presentation, we really would like to thank Populous and Matt and Tom in particular, because they were really helpful and they provided a lot of guidance on our project. So thank you.
Thank you for the excellent presentation. So now we open up the floor for questions. Any volunteers? Yes, Emmanuel.